Okay, so as you know, we're starting a process in wildlife and fisheries where the full professors evaluate each other. And we do that over 6-year cycles, and as a part of that evaluation process, the professor has to give a seminar, and that's what Tom is going to do today. So I'm going to introduce him, read to you from some information from his CV, and then I'll turn it over to Tom. There's a lot in his CV, so I printed it out. Tom Lacher's CV. So let me read to you here. All right. So Tom, he got his start in Pittsburgh, both his MS and his PhD. And then after leaving University of Pittsburgh, oh, and I should mention that you did that in 1980, which I think is the last time that Pitt had a winning football team. Anyway, I'm from Penn State, so So after he left Pittsburgh, he went to multiple academic positions. He was an assistant and associate professor at Western Washington University, had a visiting faculty position at the University of Virginia, was a full professor at Clemson, as well as an executive director of a research institute there. And of course here at A&M, he was the Claybert Chair, he was our department head, and now he's a full professor. And throughout all this time, he's had close interactions with Conservation International, both as a research fellow, but also as an executive director of research there as well. For his academic career, he's had 25 grad master's students, 19 PhD students. He's published 8 monographs, books, or edited books, that's a lot, and over 120 peer-reviewed articles, and 3 of those were in Science, so that's a big deal. Now for Tom's travels, I took that part of his CV and I took it out. And that's this here. So, Lacher's international travels. Let me read to you from this table of contents. Okay, so Tom's been in over 33 countries. It spans 6 continents, right? That's the breadth of his research program. So he truly helps out with the internationalization effort here at Texas A&M. Everyone knows that when you travel, that is a burden to do that, right? There's a major stressor on your interpersonal relationships, and that has led to the third document I'd like to show you of Tom's, which I think is his most significant contribution to science. And it's this book here, which is Lacher's Guide to Marital Reparations. So in this book you will find all the clever techniques you need to do to explain to your significant other that your trip was very boring, you saw nothing exciting, and you wish that you didn't have to go. So all 3 of these documents are now available in the library for checkout. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom.
So the title of this probably dates the beginning of my career, for those who know what that refers to. And this is what I want to do with this is sort of try and develop a theme, a common theme that I think I've tried to weave through everything I've done during my career. And so I want to do that during this full professor seminar. So the whole objective of this thing is that a couple of years ago, the Texas legislature thought that we were doing nothing, and so we probably should be evaluated like the assistant and associate professors are. And so they started this process that once every 6 years now, the full professors will be evaluated. And so Nova, Sylvie, and I volunteered to be the first guinea pigs in this process. So basically what we need to do in this whole thing is sort of give a seminar that talks about our career history and sort of emphasizes the last 6 years, because that's ostensibly our review period, and talk a little bit about what we want to do the next 6 years. And so I'll try and do this, you know, with weaving a theme. Thank you, Jane, for your valid.
It's always good to have a backup, right?
I'll try and do that. I mean, some of this, you know, you have to talk about things you did, which is sort of CV reporting. But what I'll try and do is weave some sort of theme to this whole process. So early life. As Dan mentioned, I was born in 1949 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Unlike Dr. Sylvie mentioned last year, having grown up in the country, I always lived in the city. So there are different pathways to becoming a field biologist. My great-grandparents were Irish, German, French immigrants. My father worked a number of odd jobs, eventually spent many years with the post office. And, you know, with immigrants at the level of your great-grandparents, some of them escaping the potato famine, you know, my parents were the first generation after high school, after immigration, to even finish high school in my family. And so, you know, my formative years, my mom used to take me on excursions to the Pittsburgh Zoo and the Carnegie Museum of Natural History, because that's what there was to see in Pittsburgh. And really, my first loves were evolution and paleontology. I was just fascinated by the displays at the Carnegie Museum, which is a magnificent museum if you've never been there, and like to go to the exhibits at the Pittsburgh Zoo. And so, through that is how I developed my fascination, what all of us who are in this room did with aspects of natural history. Oh, I should mention, it's a little known fact that this picture was actually the inspiration for a ZZ Top song. So now you know a little bit of Texas trivia.
Yeah.
So I was the first person in the history of my family to ever attend college, and I was pretty clueless about what that process consisted of, obviously. And so I applied to the University of Pittsburgh because I lived in Pittsburgh, and there was a university there, and that was as much as I knew about it. Fortunately, it's an AAU Tier 1 institution, so I picked a good one. And I had that as my only option, and the Vietnam War was beginning to heat up. And so for me, it was Pitt. I got into Pitt, or I was going to join the Navy because the South China Sea was better than Da Nang. And so those were my options, basically, when I graduated from high school. I got in, and my parents always wanted me to be a doctor, so I majored in biology, which wasn't a hard decision for me, given my interest in natural history and interest in evolution and paleontology. But during my academic career, undergraduate career, I took a class in general ecology and sort of got that field biology bug. And so the last summer, my senior year, I spent at the Pine Tuning Laboratory of Ecology, which is a field station in northern Pennsylvania run by the University of Pittsburgh, and spent my summer there working on a project studying foraging ecology of eastern chipmunks. And so that's when I decided that I wanted to go to graduate school and be an ecologist. So graduate school life. This is our graduate school group. Some of you may recognize a few of these people. If you went to the EIS last year, that's Mike Willard when he had hair. And for those of you who've done some international work, Lee probably knows Ricardo Ojeda from Mendoza, who's now the president of the International Federation of Mammalogists. So I applied to a bunch of schools. I knew a little bit more about graduate school and college by the time I finished my bachelor's degree. I applied to, was accepted at multiple schools. I don't remember all of them. I do remember these three: UC Davis, Minnesota, Georgia, and there were a couple others. If I'd have gone to Georgia, Eugene Odom would have been my major advisor. But Pitt offered me a full ride on a physiological ecology project. So I decided to go to Pitt, but my advisor, a fellow named Clarence Archer Tryon, a physiological ecologist, died the very first semester I was in graduate school. And so there went my advisor, there went my project, and there went my funding. So that was almost a disaster. So I was at a bit of a loss. I transferred to the Graduate School of Public Health, studying to be a health services administrator. Other than for a simple twist of fate, to quote another song, if something else hadn't happened, I might have been running Butyl instead of being a full professor doing the seminar. So during that year I was there, they hired a new vertebrate ecologist, Mike Morris. And I liked Mike, and I liked what he was doing. And he was the person that really got me interested in international activities. He had just finished his dissertation, PhD at the University of Texas, working in Argentina, and became real interested in a lot of the international research that he was engaged in. So I decided to transfer back into the PhD program. And during the summers, we kept up the work on Tamia striatus. As a result of those summer projects, while we were taking courses and writing proposals to do our dissertations, I got papers in ecology, American Zoologist, Journal of Mammalogy. I'll put that up there because for graduate students, I think it's important to think beyond your dissertation. You're not going to get a job in a competitive institution anymore, relying only on what you publish from your dissertation. You've got to think about continuing to be engaged, collaborating with other graduate students, look at side projects. You need papers, and those were really valuable for me, certainly, when I was in grad school. So we got funding to do mammal research in the Brazilian Caatinga, which is a semi-arid zone in northeastern Brazil. I moved to Brazil for 2 years, which is where I met my wife, who got huge volumes about trying to placate when I continued to travel, and studied social behavior, comparative social behavior of confined rodents, Charodon rupestris, which is this guy right here, Gallia spixa. And then with that, I made a lot of contacts and was offered a job at the University of Brasilia. So that was my very first PhD position in 1979 at the University of Brasilia. Another great experience. I worked, when I was there, spent 2 years working on social spacing and foraging behavior of black tufted ear marmosets, Calophrix peninsula. Developed a lot of close relationships with colleagues that I've maintained these days. And this is another lesson for graduate students. When you meet somebody, you never know who they're going to become. And so it's always good to network. It's always good to maintain contacts. It's always good to develop and maintain these relationships. because this project that I was working on, we did it at a field station, and one of the research biologists there was Braulio Gias, who was just a junior assistant professor. Braulio Gias is now the executive secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity. So that means you run the show. And I had an undergraduate intern working for me named Gustavo Fonseca on this project. Gustavo Fonseca now is at the World Bank and manages all the biodiversity funds at the Global Environment Facility. So you never know, this young assistant professor, this undergraduate student, cocky undergraduate student, you never know what those careers are going to lead to. Well, and I think it's important for you to understand this, the vision of networking is a long-term vision. So what I wanted to do is give a really quick, brief summary of career accomplishments. So this is the 35-year thumbnail sketch of what I did. So as Dan mentioned, I had a series of positions. I started at the University of Brasilia, then I went to Western Washington, which is where I got tenure. Clemson, I was director of the Archibald Tropical Research Center, and that's when I was first promoted to full professor. I held the Kleberg Chair at A&M from '96 to 2004. I took a 2-year leave of absence to go to CI and wound up actually resigning the Kleberg Chair position. Stayed at CI for 5 years, where I was the director of the Center for Applied Biodiversity Science and senior vice president. Then came back here as department head, and then since 2011 I've been back on the faculty as a full professor. So I'm going to come back to this because there's some aspects of this I think I want to emphasize when I talk about my career. I've been most of my career in academia, but I did take a 5-year break at CI, and I was hired to establish this TEAM network, which is a network of field stations that were monitoring aspects of biodiversity in the tropics. And then after I was there for about a year, a little over a year, I assumed the leadership of the Center for Applied Biodiversity Science, and there's Gustavo Fonseca again, who was the executive director of the Center for Applied Biodiversity Science. He moved up to a higher administrative position, and I replaced him. So that's network coming back again. And it was a great career decision. It gave me a much broader perspective on global conservation. There are times that I regret not having a Dow chair position anymore, but I really would not trade those 5 years. They were incredibly valuable years in terms of broadening my perspective on really what I want to do for the remainder of my career. So going back to that table, if you look at this career balance between administration and teaching research, I've actually had pretty much a 50-50 split through most of my career. If you look at the 35 years, I spent 19 years in teaching and research positions, and I spent 16 years in administrative positions. And that's actually increased in terms of percentage over the years. Not surprising when you begin to become more and more of a senior faculty member. But I do want to emphasize that I put a lot of time into administration. And there are costs to doing administration, but I think there are benefits as well. And actually I had a 9-year period between 2002 and 2011 where I was 9 consecutive years in an administrative position. This will start to decline because I will never again take administration. So what was the theme throughout that 35-year career? Well, I think I can easily say that it was advancing biodiversity research and conservation. Even though I started off doing behavioral ecology and did a lot of work on population community dynamics and community structure of small mammals in Brazil, I always had this interest in conservation, and very, very early on, and I think it was probably when I went to Western Washington University, that I really began to understand that I wanted to have this research somehow integrated in influencing conservation. I was in a college called Huxley College of Environmental Studies, which was a college of environmental studies that has no departments, and so you're in the same department as people that are involved in environmental literature or sociology, economics. You had to co-teach classes with social scientists, and lawyers, and economists. And it was a really great experience, I think, in sort of initiating this interest I had in biodiversity research, and especially research applied towards conservation. So during that career, I think the main things I can say that I view as highlights were this continuing history of research engagement I have in Brazil. 38 years now I've been working in Brazil. And that includes serving on committees, conducting joint research, teaching grad classes, workshops, the whole array of things which are in my CV. I'm not going to go over the details of those things. But some other things I was really proud of was this Amascondi initiative that we started when I was at Clemson. This was one of the really very first, as far as I know, the first binational buffer zone management project, looking at trying to manage community development activities in the buffer zone of the Longestad Biosphere Reserve in Costa Rica and Panama. We had funding for 7 years, and I ran that for 7 years. And this project's still running. It's 24 years. And it's running now without, obviously without the grant support anymore. In fact, Margot visited the sites and talked to the people, and they're still, you know, they've become independent, they've created their own community organizations, and they continue to run these projects. In terms of taxonomic focus, I worked on birds, I've worked on herbs a little bit, but really my focus has been mammalian research over the years, focusing initially on comparative social behavior work, which I did for my dissertation in Brasilia, working on mammalian community ecology, community structure, you know, the relative importance of competitive interactions and microhabitat selection and structuring small mammal communities, and then more recently conservation through the work at CI. And you know, I've published that research in a bunch of journals, and those are some of the ones that people should recognize as, I think, having, you know, a certain weight whenever you publish that kind of research. The other thing I've done is I've had significant collaboration over the years with environmental toxicologists looking at impacts of contaminants on wildlife, and that resulted actually in 2 books. And that research has been very interesting in terms of understanding the importance of collaboration and putting together research teams. Because if anybody's done any toxicology, like Miguel's here, I thought it was Miguel. There they are. You know you've got to work with ecologists, you've got to work with analytical chemists, you've got to work with biochemists. You put together these teams of people that have a hard time talking to each other sometimes. And you've got to be able to put together you know, very, very complex and interactive you know, experimental designs and research programs to be able to look at these effects on large scales. So that taught me a lot about working on big projects, which I think came to benefit me when I went to CI, for example. And then also when I was at Clemson, we did the first mapping of land cover for Costa Rica that was linked to vertebrate distributions, and used that to try and assess conservation effectiveness for protected areas of Costa Rica, which is also a book that we published by Columbia University Press. But I don't want to downplay the administrative role, because I think I did a lot of really important things as an administrator also, and I think those administrative things that I did also benefited my research program. I was the founding director of the Archibald Tropical Research Center, which established and managed the field station on Dominica, where we still, Texas A&M, teach a class, 25th consecutive year now we've been teaching that class on Dominica. And you know, I feel pretty good about being the founding director, because this place is in its 25th year of operation, and it still works, and there's still multiple institutions that use it, researchers that stay here. So I think that was a pretty significant accomplishment. I was the founding director of the Tropical Ecology Assessment Monitoring Network, which is now in its 13th consecutive year of operation, and now they have 17 participating stations in 15 different countries, and so that continues. I ran the Center for Applied Biodiversity Science at Conservation International. We got a research staff of 75. An annual budget. Annual budget was what I had to go chase. $15 million a year, and when I was there, we were 3rd in the world in environmental citations at one point. So. And then the 4-year term as director of Wildlife and Fishery Sciences. Is this in the way? Yeah. It's no secret I didn't love being part of that. But I felt what I feel the best about the 4 years that I was department head is I did keep us solvent. We never went into the red. It wasn't a really wealthy time in terms of resources available at the university. And I was able to hire 5 assistant professors with full startups. Some of them are here. But I think most importantly is in relation to this theme, I was able to fill those critical positions and fully staffed biological research and teaching collections. And I think that was, I mean, I would view that as my single most significant accomplishment as department head. So publications, I'm not going to go over this stuff. So you know, books, monographs, book chapters, peer review papers, these red list accounts, which are sort of semi-peer reviewed monographs. If you add them all up, it's 328. You know, we don't count all these things the same way. If you count the first 3 categories, which is sort of the things we think are more important, you know, those are 100 and something. So look at my CV. Career citations. This is Google Scholar. Some people like Web of Science. Some people like other things. But it's a Google Scholar citation trend, which is nice because it's, you know, it's getting better. It's not getting worse, which is an important thing. And those are the career citations, and since 2009, just to get a little bit of perspective. And if I look at the top cited papers, my top 10 papers all are right at about 100 citations or more. And so I think I've got, you know, you can say that I've got 10 papers that are pretty important and have been cited pretty frequently. So I think the impact of the work has been significant. You know, it's not Nobel laureate level stuff. But I'm satisfied with that productivity in consideration of the fact that I was a 50% administrator for most of my career. So let's look at 2008 to 2013. So this is what my review period is. So I was department head for a little over 3 years. So the past 6 years I've been 54% administration, 46% teaching and research. I try to become engaged again in service, post-department head. Again, 54% was department head, but I chaired the peer review committee for TMP for a couple of years. I'm chairing the awards committee right now. And the thing I'm particularly proud of is being faculty advisor for these 2 student organizations. It's been a really, really great experience being able to interact with really good students, and especially at the formative stages of their careers. There's one right there, Shelby Vega, if you don't know her, is president of the Society of Conservation Biology. So I really enjoy doing that. And this is just a shopping list of things. I just wanted to point out a couple of things. I have some of this stuff services related to being a department head, but post-department head, I've been called upon to do other things, and I've been called upon to do things that have international impact, and so I think that there's an appreciation at the university level that I can contribute to these committees and provide additional service at the university level and international activities. And the others are associated with environmental related committees. And so I think this business of biodiversity and international competence is something that the university appreciates even post-department head. So how do you maintain research and graduate education while being a department head? Well, it's not easy because, as Michael will tell you, doing research and advising graduate students is neither expected, encouraged, nor supported by the administration if you're a department head. But I did maintain a core research program and worked hard to do that, and recruited an outstanding group of master's and PhD students. I continued to work to maintain a modest but consistent publication record, knowing that someday I was going to come out again, and if you've got that black hole, it's hard to get started up again. I tried to keep a really high profile by participating in international conferences, workshops, working with NGOs, again, to maintain those connections, and, chasing money in anticipation of the fact that at some point I was going to come back to the faculty and I was going to need to support people. So these are the publications during the time I was department head and a little bit post. So I had 1 book, 5 book chapters, 15 papers published in press. One was just accepted yesterday, so 16. And 5 papers, which are now 4, submitted. And I actually did 130 IUCN Red List species accounts during that period also, which is when I was engaged with the global mammal assessment. And these actually are citable and have DOIs, and not the same paper actually. They still get cited. So in terms of keeping an international research profile, I tried to be engaged as a participant or a speaker or an organizer of symposium workshops whenever I could that could maintain an international profile on conservation. So I was involved in global mammal assessment work in Honduras, panel speaker at the World Conservation Congress in Barcelona, and just a session chair at the World Conservation Congress 4 years later in Jeju, South Korea. I co-organized and chaired a symposium on the future of the world's mammals at the International Mammal Meetings in Mendoza, Argentina in 2009, and was invited by the Packard Foundation to be a roundtable speaker on the conservation management program that they run at UC Davis. And continue to give papers. And so this is the summary of some of the papers. I'm not going to read these titles, but again, I tried to, if you look at that, the theme is still to maintain that profile in international conservation and in biodiversity research. And maintain those international contacts. So I went to Argentina, I went to Canada, Brazil, United Arab Emirates, Brazil again, Saudi Arabia, all of these things trying to participate and maintain that kind of international activity. A lot of that when I was department head, in fact. And then in addition, I've always been involved in the international teaching-related activities in conservation and biodiversity. So I'm frequently invited as an external reviewer of Brazilian dissertations. I mean, I can be on a committee and read a 200-page dissertation in Portuguese, and it's not that often you can have an external reviewer that you can bring to do those sorts of things from another country. I do seminars. I just last year I did a symposium on ecology and conservation of mammals, of wild mammals, over a period of a week. And just a couple weeks ago, I went back down there and I did a 30 contact hour intensive graduate course in conservation science. And I try and maintain that international service also. So I'm a member of a couple of committees, Conservation Awards Committee and the Latin American Fellowship Committee and the American Society of Mammalogists. Just last year I was appointed chair of the Conservation Committee of the International Federation of Mammalogists, which is the federation of all of the mammal societies of the world. So it's a big organization. couple of task forces for SCB. I've been on a Fulbright panel for the last 4 years evaluating Fulbright applications. And I'm associate editor of an Argentine journal and on the editorial board for a Brazilian journal. And I managed to finish a couple students. A few of those have been around for a while. A lot of you probably remember John. But we got John out the door. Laura Weber was working with Doug Slack, and when Doug retired, I was on her committee and I took over as chair, and Laura finished. And then I recruited a couple of master students. Krista Adamack, a lot of you probably remember, finished her master's, and Chris Arkenberg did a non-thesis master's. Jane was on her committee, just finished recently. And I've got these current graduate students, all of whom are extremely accomplished, particularly these PhD students. Margot's got a Iger traineeship, she's got an LSAM fellowship, university fellowship. Emma has Clemency Fellowship, American Society of Neurologists Field Research Grant. And Emma was chosen the GBIF, which is a Global Biodiversity Information Facility, Young Researcher of the Year Award at the PhD level for 2013. That's one person worldwide. Okay, that's her right there. So. And then Gabi, who's here, also has an SF Graduate Research Fellowship, and Kelsey's the newest student who started last year working on her master's. So those are the 4 students I've recruited. The other thing I've tried to do is integrate undergraduate research. I'm involved in these 2, faculty advisor for these 2 undergraduate societies. And I've been very impressed. Some people are more impressed than others, or less impressed than others about undergraduates. But I've been very impressed with the quality of undergraduates I've interacted with. And just over the past 2 years, I've had all of these students do undergraduate research projects in our lab, many of them working with Emma or with Margot on projects. And so I'm very happy with the ability to provide opportunities for them. And I've also got 15 A&M students who have written or are writing a total of 22 accounts for the archive website as opportunities from gains of writing experience. And then grants. You have to keep on chasing grants. I've listed IGRID up there, but that was 2007. But I've been an active participant in that project over the past 6 years. Continue to be. And then I've had some other funding. Got a Clemency grant with Ivan Castro, who got his PhD here a number of years ago. Some of you probably remember Ivan. And then a lot of this, of course, has been the work of grad students writing proposals. You know how that works. I'm just this PI, but they do the work. We've had funding for that work from Mohammed bin Zayed at Bat Conservation International, more Mohammed bin Zayed here, Big Earthwatch grant for Margot's work. We've got National Fish and Wildlife Foundation grant that we're doing some red list assessment work in the Gulf of Mexico on fishes. John McEachran, who was here this morning, actually is involved with this project in these assessments also. And then a big Uganda grant that we've got just starting up, which is mostly capacity building, USAID capacity building. And then we've had some TAMU support. This is mostly Lee and Amanda's work, but my name's on it. But those have been trying to generate some additional resources for the aggregate, which we all think is extremely important. So, highlighting the aggregate, the other thing I've tried to be involved with is, in any way possible, to continue to work to support the IGRID, the principles of the IGRID, the Applied Biodiversity Science Center IGRID, because I think it's transformative. I think it's a program which has completely changed the perspective of those graduate students who have participated in the IGRID. I think they have a very, very different worldview of what conservation means, and we're certainly hoping that we can continue those efforts in the future. So next 6 years, so what am I going to do? Well, I've got some incoming graduate students. Jessica Gilbert, potentially an IGRID trainee, and also a graduate merit fellowship, and I think she's coming for sure. Vanessa Canis, who I'm co-advising with Jessica, is also offered a graduate merit fellowship, which that offers pending, waiting to hear from her. And then a Nigerian student named Irola Tanji, I think is almost certainly coming. We're just trying to get final details of Nigerian government funding for her work. She works on bats. She's got a master's at the University of Leeds. Going to maintain the same teaching schedule, 3 or 4 in the fall, entomology in the spring. Dominica class, working on, with Matt and Margo, and Kelsey, a DE class for conservation of endangered species. It's going to be one of the modules in that program that Roel's developing. And in that particular class, there's fully 1/3 of that is focused on endangered species, international endangered species conventions and programs, including a short course in IUCN Red List assessments that I've been working with IUCN on helping to import those modules into the class. So it's an interesting class. And I have a feeling that we could potentially offer that class way beyond Texas A&M University. I think there'll be significant demand. I'm working on a couple of collaborations that I think are important. This long-standing collaboration I have with IUCN, I'll continue. I have another slide about that. And in fact, we're working with the Texas A&M University Research Foundation on some potential donor support. There seems to be a pretty significant interest of a major donor who, I talked to Alan and Sam yesterday, everything is still go, who's very interested in providing support to that, the IUCN Red List Partnership, which is that large agreement that we signed in 2010 between A&M, BPR's office, and IUCN. There's an NGO in Austin that if some of you haven't been over there, it's probably worth going over and talking to these people. It's called Global Wildlife Conservation. These were a bunch of additional CI refugees, when sort of CI began to shut down its biodiversity programs, and we had the CI diaspora all over the country. And so they're the actually the NGO right now that's responsible for housing and advancing the reassessment of amphibians. The Global Amphibian Assessment published in 2004, they're in the process of reassessing right now. So working very closely with them. Also, continuing research with these collaborators in Brazil. I've been to Brazil twice, once a year the last 2 years. We bring people up here once a year the last 2 years. This is a program that Kurt Weinmiller had started with the State University of Maringá. They're very interested in expanding beyond aquatic ecology. They want to develop terrestrial ecology programs, and so we're sort of building that collaboration. And so I'm actually going to be co-advising a couple of master students, and we're going to try to recruit a PhD student to co-advise also with some faculty. And I'm working with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation to develop a conservation scholars program built on this ABS model. And Lee, I've been talking to Lee about that. He's very familiar with this. And this actually is happening. We're going to have a meeting with them on the 17th of March. They're flying down here. And what they want to do is create a conservation scholars program for internships for undergraduates who would be paired with a faculty member, who will develop scientific and technical abilities. Then they would pay full freight for them to go to UC or to Austin or wherever to actually spend time embedded in an NGO or an agency. So they would have that joint science policy training. So I think it's going to be a really novel program for undergraduates. And then there's also going to be a component of graduate education built on top of that too. We'll probably start the undergraduates first. I mean, the commitment is $75K for the summer, and anywhere from $200 to $250K per summer for the next 5 to 7 years. So it's going to be, we haven't signed a paper yet, but it looks like it's going to be a very big agreement. So. A little bit more on the IUCN activities. I'm co-chair of the IUCN Small Mammal Specialist Group. We are responsible for 2,800 species of mammals, which is over half the mammals. Fortunately, a lot of them are easy to reassess, but we're in the process of beginning that reassessment, and so we're forming subcommittees, and we've got a website up, the Global Mammal Forum, which is where the accounts are posted, is up and functioning, and we're doing the first initial reassessment batch of accounts. And so that has to be done by mid-2015. And another thing actually I've been talking to Lee about is the possibility of trying to actually have some people based here working with Global Wildlife Conservation in Austin that could be based potentially at the BRTC and be technical staff that we hire to help assist in the global amphibian reassessment also. So I think we have a pretty good chance to get some funding to do that. And then the other big thing is I sit on the IUCN Red List Committee, so that's since we're a partner, all the partners, there are 11 partners, have representation on that committee. And there's 23 people on the committee, and basically we're the strategic planning unit for the 7,000 plus researchers in the Species Survival Commission for the Red List. So we meet twice a year, and actually the next meeting is going to be in Cambridge in the UK in May. In terms of research themes, I would have to say that right now at this stage in my career, I really want to do something that I can see is going to translate in some fashion to some level of conservation action. I've been doing basic research, I've published research in journals, I've published basic research, but I want to see something get done. I mean, you're at a stage in your career where you'd like to see somebody use the information, use the data that you generate to actually do something that advances something that you're interested in or passionate about, which in my case is conservation. And so I really want to try and tailor things so that that doesn't deny the importance of collecting basic biological information, which frequently is the basis for a lot of the applied work we do. But still, I kind of want to maintain that emphasis. And so if there's three areas, they would be this business of looking at patterns and process of biodiversity and complex landscapes. We first started doing that back at Clemson when we did that Costa Rica study. Most of my graduate students are doing precisely that. So Margot and Emma are doing exactly that sort of work. Kelsey's plan thesis work is exactly the same thing. This business of assessment of current and future extinction risk in mammals. A lot of that's linked, obviously, to the strong ties I have to IUCN and the interest I have in advancing the red list process. And then population and community ecology of tropical bats and small mammals and mosaic landscapes. This is probably, of all of these, the one more focused on basic research, but this is spinning off of this collaboration I'm developing in Brazil for this institution. So the pattern and process of biodiversity and complex landscapes. There's been a lot of work done in Brazil and the Brazilian Atlantic forests, one of the most biodiversity rich of all the world's ecosystems, one of the most heavily degraded of all the world's ecosystems. Probably 95% of the Brazilian Atlantic forest has been lost or degraded, and yet it still remains one of the most species rich of all the world's ecosystems. Given a very long history of separation from the Amazon, a lot of the biodiversity, there's a lot of endemism, tropical endemism in the Brazilian Atlantic forest, but it's heavily fragmented. It's the area that was first colonized. It's like the eastern U.S., and so it's become heavily fragmented. There are lots of interesting opportunities for conservation because a lot of the economic activity in Brazil has moved into central Brazil, so some of these areas are beginning to regenerate. And so I've been working with these researchers in Brazil to look at the relationship between effects of fragmentation, geometry and size, the whole process of fragmentation, on bats in terms of regional species pools, because these are highly mobile mammals. And look at these assessments in regard to relative impacts on the diversity of trophic yields. We've got many trophic yields of this relatively agile group of organisms, which has been very, very poorly studied. Most of what you know about fragmentation focuses on, in mammals, it's small mammals, which have very poor dispersal ability. And those focus on sort of local dynamics. What we wanted to do is use these data sets to get a look at larger scale regional dynamics and how these affect different trophic guilds within bats. This assessment, assessment of extinction risks through IUCN, again, as part of this process, IUCN publishes spatial databases on all the assessed mammals on their website. To collaborate, one of the other partners is University of Rome, and so people I've worked with at Rome, Luigi Boitani and Carlo Rondinini, have been working on correcting all those polygons using ecological niche model approaches, so that we now have much better resolution of the aerial support, the spatial support of populations of species. And so one of the things I really want to do, so one of these projects that's in the pipeline right now, we're bringing in a postdoc, which is what the objective of this would be to use a number of these different regional landscape models to look at scenarios for conservation prioritization, using different mechanisms of ecological niche modeling assessment. And I'm also working on an NSF proposal with Reset Aksakaya of SUNY Stony Brook. He's the guy that used to work with applied biomathematics. He's the guy that wrote Rammus originally. To look at forecasting consequences of climate and land use change, on extinction risk, and also to test some hypotheses of different conservation scenarios in the context of a variety of different climate change and habitat degradation models. And then the community ecology of tropical bats and mammals, somebody working with these colleagues in Brazil. And this is really focused more on working at a student level, again, with Brazilian students. And some of them are going to be working on fairly basic ecological projects, some of them are going to be working on more applied projects. But we want to begin to develop, to complement this strong program in aquatic ecology, which exists at this university, that Kirk has been involved with for years and years, a terrestrial component. They have what's called a PELG, which is the Brazilian equivalent of an LTER site, which is almost exclusively been focused on aquatic ecology. They want to expand this to include a variety of different terrestrial ecological projects. So really what I'm doing is been working with them over the past 2 years. We're going to revise the MOU that we have with the university, so to expand the scope of that project, and as part of that process, begin to interact with the students. And so I'm already co-advising Gabriela, who is an undergraduate working on a project on introduced marmosets in protected areas in the state of Paraná. And then two of these students are coming to A&M. Lais Sanseverino is going to be here next month, and she's coming up to work. We've got a project where we're looking at some zoonoses and Brazilian bats, and she's actually going to be working with Maria Estevia Santo over in the vet school on Borrelia, assessing Borrelia, levels of Borrelia affecting infestation and bat blood samples. And so she's an undergraduate actually, so she'll be here for a month or two. And then I've got a sandwich student, another Lais with a Y, Padoline, who's coming up in July, and she'll be here for 6 months. And she's also working on bats and food resources. So the sandwich things, you have to do something that complements that. So we're doing some spatial analysis of some of the patterns that she's looking at. So this is something that I've been wanting to do for a long time. Now that I'm no longer department head, I really want to invest a lot of time. I really like working, like I said, I like working with students, I like training students, and I like Brazil. So I mean, so it all comes together. So that's pretty much it. That's me in a collage. 35 years in international conservation. So, questions, I'd be happy to answer.